I'm Alex Hudson, and I am a board member here at the Block Table. I'm joined by others here from the Block Table, which is a group of every month here at the Rabbit Box. You can come for an event just like this that's about what's important, what's going on in our city, the things that we care about, the things that you're talking about. And you get to hear from super smart people like the three people to my left. And then we get to hear from you, and we get to have conversations about the things that matter to us in our city right now and in the future. So I'm Alex Hudson. I'm the moderator. To my left, Sandeep Kaushik, political consultant, hot take trader,
It was a slur.
Yeah.
podcast host, Seattle Nice and Blue City Blues, cool guy, cat owner.
Depends on who you ask.
To his left, we have Scott Greenstone. Scott is a reporter and the co-host of Sound Politics on KUOW, our NPR station that I hope every single person here is a contributor to, because if you like this, you're going to love what they got on 94.9. And to his left is Tiffani McCoy, an unsung hero of Seattle politics who is behind some of the most groundbreaking leaps forward in our city's policymaking in a long time, and is the co-executive director of Our Neighbors, which is the collective powerhouse behind the social housing initiative, which most Seattleites voted for last year. So we are here. This group got together after our panel in August. Oh, I got one more. I want to say thank you to our host, the Rabbit Box. This place is cool. It's cool here. The Rabbit Box is a really special place, and they're doing something really special, which is they're keeping our culture alive here in Seattle and beyond. They're making a space for people to come together and to enjoy arts and music and civics. And so you should keep coming back here for this and beyond. One thing I'm looking forward to is on December 14th, they're having the Holiday Magic Cabaret. Scott, you were asking me holiday things. It's a magic and mind reading show with quote, lots of audience participation. So if you like that and you like this place, come back here and support them and keep our city cool. So this group of people came together after the primary election in August, and we had a really amazing conversation about our politics, our results, our analysis, where we think things are going. And because it went so great, we're bringing the band back together now that we're on the other side of the general election. And the results are in, they're done. There's no recounting by hand or machine. Thank God for the stress is over. And we're ready to talk about what it all means. So question number one, let's start with the big picture. So as I said, the ballots are counted, the tweets have cooled down. Stephen Paolini in this room knows that my spreadsheet has been retired. And everybody thinks that they know what happened. So I'd like to hear it from you folks, and Sandeep, I'll start with you. What's the clearest message that voters sent in the election this year?
Can you hear me? Yeah. It was kind of a repudiation or rejection of the status quo ante in Seattle, right? And what that means is, I mean, kind of obviously, it was a kind of sharp rebuke of the kind of business downtown, sort of the moderates who had sort of taken control in the last couple of election cycles at the council and stuff like that. That's pretty self-evident, right? About when you saw not just Katie Wilson's win, but Deion Foster, Erica Evans in the city attorney's race. I will say this, though. I also think there are really two establishments in Seattle. There is a kind of moderate, sort of pro-businessy establishment. There's also a kind of largely progressive labor-backed progressive establishment in the city. And to a pretty significant extent, I think it was a repudiation of that establishment as well, in the sense that, progressive labor didn't really get on board with Katie Wilson at the beginning. They were there with the mayor, the labor council, those folks. And it's because they're also pretty, I think, entrenched into a kind of cozy status quo or sort of way of that things happen in Seattle. Really quick thing I'll say. A typical politician in Seattle, and let's take Bruce Harrell, for example, like sees their job as doing what? Like, look at how Bruce Harrell did his job. He's like, okay, I got to conciliate the series of sort of nodes of power or interest, right, in the city. So I got to throw progressive labor a bone over here. I got to give the business community something over there. Man, I'm going to give the social service people this thing or that thing. And then, you know, at the end of the day, I've checked all these boxes and I've conciliated all these groups. My job is done, right? And when he started this campaign, he had done a pretty good job of that, right? Everybody was kind of on board the Bruce train in the power structure of Seattle. Didn't look like Katie had any sort of pathway. The problem was there are a lot of voters out there that are frustrated with the status quo and weren't seeing problems getting solved and didn't really care that you threw a bone to this or that player in the establishment, whether on the progressive side or the moderate side. And Katie saw that opening, right, and was able to kind of drive a wedge and kind of talk to those voters in a way that I think the Herald folks were like, what did we do wrong? We did what we were supposed to. You know, we did what politicians do in Seattle, which is conciliate the existing sort of status quo anti-power structure, right? And that's, I think, what was being repudiated here. So anyway, I'll shut up. Yeah.
Tiffani, was everybody on board the Bruce train, to quote Sandeep from 90 seconds ago?
I'd say, yeah, unfortunately they were, and unfortunately for Bruce, probably something that bothers him when he goes to sleep at night, is he decided to be the face of the opposition campaign to Proposition 1A, which would fund the social housing developer with an excess compensation tax. If you all remember the 4 mailers that you got in your mailbox, all of them for Proposition 1B, they all featured the mayor front and center saying to vote for Prop 1B over 1A. So from that point forward, it was really clear to us at Our Neighbors, it was really clear to Katie, because she called me the next day saying what she was going to do, that Bruce Harrell was on the wrong side of history. He wasn't in touch with voters. He wasn't in touch with how much people are struggling with housing, with childcare, with food costs. And I do agree with Sandeep's analysis overall in the premise of Bruce Harrell was focusing on the 2 powerhouses, but what that fails to notice is people being driven out of the city, is people having to take on another roommate, is people wanting to vote for hope. So for me, the biggest message for the election this year was people have hope, even in the time of the Trump regime, and they had the ability to actually vote for that at the ballot box. And that is why we saw those resounding victories. And we'll get into like the closeness of the mayoral race in a little bit, but I think that this was a message of hope. It was a belief that government can deliver beyond what this city council and this mayor has delivered in the past couple of years, which public safety is really important. Please don't get me wrong. But if that is like your be-all and end-all as a position of power, where you're not at all addressing all of these dual crises, these triple crises, then voters are going to start looking to other things. And thankfully, we had candidates that wanted to step through that door, that wanted to run, even if they didn't get the backing of also progressive labor. I'll say, too, for the D9 position, also progressive labor, the building trades did not also get behind Dion Foster. So there were splits, even in labor, over some of those citywide races. But now we're going to coalesce, we're going to go forward, and now we need to make sure that we actually deliver, that government can provide for people with a left agenda. And I look forward to getting into that in a little bit.
Scott, you represent looking beyond just the city of Seattle. And we'll get into that later, but so that's a sharp analysis of what the Seattle voters are sending. As you're thinking about like the county or even the 9 special legislative races this year, what are voters saying here and elsewhere?
Yeah. Zooming out, we called you gave Sound Politics, my podcast, such a nice shout out, so thank you. So I feel really bad doing more self-promotion, but we called our podcast a couple days after the election, the first analysis episode, which Sandeep was on. We titled it like "All Politics is National," and that was just like a title that like I think jumped into someone's head, and then it seemed to fit okay. We usually decide titles at the end, which is obviously a stupid way to do podcast episodes, but it has stuck in my head because definitely as I look around Western Washington in general, you look to even places like Bellevue City Council, where a pillar of Bellevue, Conrad Lee, after 30 years got kicked out because he donated to Trump's inauguration fund. And Democrats are flipping districts that they haven't been able to flip, or I should say seats in areas that they haven't been able to flip down in Southwest Washington, like since Trump was first elected. Those like Longview and Grays Harbor County type districts. And so, but I do think it ties into that affordability question that both of you brought up, because it definitely is this sort of, I think voters, especially swing voters, are really desperate. They want someone to do something about how expensive everything is. And, a lot of them, I think, turned to Trump last year, not so much around here, but in other parts of the country. And I think now they're turning to whoever is not running City Hall in a lot of cities. Obviously, there's, like Seattle, obviously there's, exceptions like Everett. The mayor hung on there by a thread, Cassie Franklin. But yeah, so I definitely think that all politics is national, is what the voters, what I'm taking away from this election. Even local politics.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have nothing but nonstop conversations about national politics, and it's the vibe.
Can I make one really quick point? I'm on the record saying this. I do think there was a big Trump effect in this election, right? I think maybe the outcome of the mayor's race would have been different if Trump hadn't been elected last November. I do think it changed the sort of psychological complexion of the progressive electorate, particularly in the city of Seattle, but really across King County and maybe all of Western Washington. To Scott's point, that said, it is really important to acknowledge here, like that the frustration around the sort of state of things in Seattle that your like typical normie voter has nothing to do with Trump. I mean, predates like Trump coming into office, right? And we haven't elected a mayor in Seattle since 2005, right? There's a reason for that. Like
Reelected.
Sorry, we have elected, but we haven't reelected a mayor. Yeah, we've cycled through a number of mayors, right? But I actually. Speaking of plugging podcasts, on Blue City Blues, one of my podcasts, we had Danny Westneat on after he wrote a column about sort of the fickleness of Seattle voters, and we kind of unpacked that in a conversation with Danny. And I think, why do our voters sort of yo-yo back and forth between these two poles that feel subjectively, center-left and kind of movement-left, feel really, really far apart subjectively, though, as Danny points out, objectively, they're kind of not that far apart in a lot of ways. But it doesn't play out that way in Seattle politics. So anyway, yes, it's national, but there is a kind of core reservoir of local frustration with the state of things in Seattle that I think has been going on for a while now, and is sort of driving a lot of our politics. And it bit the left in 2021 and 2023, and it bit the moderates this time.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing how our one-term mayor streak really coincides with the massive rapid escalation of the cost of housing. So elections always come with some plot twists. Something happens that nobody, and we did predictions the last time. We didn't do predictions this time. But sometimes something comes that you don't see happening. So what about this cycle? Either the results or the vibe, or Sandeep, you talked already about kind of the alignment of the groups. What about this surprised you, and what's your theory about it? Scott, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. What surprised me? I had something written out for this, and now it's jumping. Somehow this question, surprised me. Oh, this is maybe a little bit more a primary thing, but I'm surprised. I was surprised that the Democrat on Democrat contests didn't shift more to the middle. I wondered. I thought that maybe dissatisfaction with taxes. People said Bob Ferguson, did the biggest tax hike in history after saying he wasn't going to do any of that or didn't want to do very much of it. I thought maybe that would show up in some of these, like there was a special election on the east side between Vandana Slatter and Amy Whalen. Vandana Slatter, who voted for the taxes, did great. Amy Whalen did not. Same thing in Burien with a race that Sandeep worked on a little bit. There was a more moderate Democrat losing to a slightly more progressive Edwin Obras, chosen by the Democratic Party. So I was kind of surprised that that didn't show up a little bit more. And I think it's that people are really, it is that shit. I don't think people are necessarily feeling a lot of the little tax tweaks that Democrats did in Olympia as much as they're feeling real fear and frustration over, Donald Trump and wanting to hear candidates talk about that.
Tiffany, you want something that took you by surprise?
Nothing necessarily took me by surprise with the election results. I expected Katie to win. I knew the ground game. I knew that Bruce was vulnerable. I also know that the reason, and I didn't get into this in the first question, that like some people in labor stuck with Bruce for so long is because we know that Bruce is a very vindictive person. I have been called into the principal's office myself personally a couple of years ago for something I said in the media that made him not feel so good. So we know from reporting, we know from what happened with Monisha Harrell, we know from his past history, like how he has acted and how he has utilized his power for his own gain. The one thing that did surprise me is him even giving the faintest notion that there was something that was amiss with our King County election results when he did his announcement speech saying that he was that he accepted the election results, but he couldn't help it to dangle a little bit of like misnomer of fear, like, oh, there were anomalies, there were concerns. And I was really surprised by that the effect of Trump is even getting into like local politics to the level where we have the mayor of Seattle casting aspersions or doubts in King County elections. So that was really surprising to me. What was not surprising to me too was though that he brought out a stage and made sure that it was a choreographed way that he stepped down from office. So that was unfortunate, but for the election results, we've been talking to voters about housing, like regular voters out at farmers markets, knocking on doors with low propensity, medium propensity, high propensity voters. We know the affordability crisis is hurting everyone, even people who are making six figures. So it really wasn't a surprise, these results. It's just glad that we had candidates that were willing to run on that fear and that hurt that people are feeling on their pocketbooks.
So my big surprise, obviously Katie Wilson's win. At the beginning of this race, right, it seemed like it was an impossible race, but by the end it felt inevitable, right? So I don't know there was a surprise at the end. The thing that really surprised me was the King County Executives race, right? Which I think I'm on the record saying this maybe in this panel after the primary that, I still don't frickin' know what that race was about, right? Like it was a race about nothing. It never took off. After the primary, I finally thought, okay, they were doing their little warm-up dance during the primary, but now we'll get to a race where they're going to try to differentiate from each other or point out some kind of different, and it never happened, right? And I think to Claudia Balducci's detriment, right? She never tried to really draw a distinction between Girmay and so it became a race about vibes, right? And in a vibes race, Girmay is a young, charismatic, up and coming, exciting, candidate against somebody. Claudia's a great person, great politician, very experienced, but she's not going to win that race on vibes, right? And so I'm still sort of mystified about what happened. I think there was maybe a kind of subtext about race in that, and a sort of fear of drawing a contrast that might lead to accusations that you, the white candidate, are going after a person of color. And I do think that was part of it, but I still don't. So anyway, I'm surprised. Surprised that race never turned into a race.
We thought it was a race for a second because 5 days or a week before, maybe a week and a half before the election, there was a poll out that showed Claudia ahead, and that poll was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't believable.
I know. You figure out a way to make a poll that's never wrong, and you can buy the rabbit box.
I mean, one thing about that poll, I was on a panel with a pollster, Andrew Tebow, this morning. He pointed out, even in that poll, when you asked people who had already voted how they had voted, Girmay was leading 54-46 among the already, and that's basically where the race ended up, right? So it's just telling you, like, as people started to pay attention and do their votes, they were coalescing right around Girmay, and so even in that poll, you can kind of see that.
Well, one thing that will be a race is there's a race going for the next 44 days, which is between now and when Katie Wilson gets sworn in. So clock starts ticking real fast as soon as she raises her hand. What is her first political landmine to navigate? We'll start. We're not starting with the low-hanging fruit here. We're starting with the spiciest fruit you can pick.
Who do you want to start?
Sandeep, why don't you start?
All right. Well, so I think Katie put down a lot of markers in this campaign, right? I mean, she's going to fix the cost of a slice of pizza. So we're going to see how that works out. But I do think, as I was saying before, I think we've got a kind of too cozy, kind of ossified status quo in Seattle that needs some disruption, and I think she has the potential to be a disruptor. I'm kind of very intrigued by that. One of the most specific markers she put down during the race was she said, I am going to very quickly get 4,000 unsheltered homeless people either into shelter or some kind of housing, right? And there's not a lot of detail to what she wants to do about that. I'm very curious about it. I think she's coming on my other podcast, Seattle Nice, tomorrow morning. It's a question I'm obviously going to want to ask her about what her play is on that. But and I'm sorry,
Political landmine.
Here's the political landmine on that, right? First of all, there's a lot of concern, with good reason, that the Trump administration is about to cut off all of this funding that goes to the homeless service providers in Seattle right now. Much of it to permanent supportive housing providers like DSC. I'm on the board there. If Katie really wants to make a big move on shelter, right, as a kind of interim way to get people off the streets and out of encampments and into some better, safer place to go, I think there are real potential fights brewing. In fact, I think we saw an initial skirmish in the city council over some funding that people aren't really paying attention to right now. But it's telling you what's coming is that Katie may have a fight with her left and some of the folks on the left about who want to see funding. Every dollar needs to go to shore up the existing system rather than taking dollars and putting it into a different place, rather than permanent supportive housing. All of a sudden money's going to shelter. So that is disruptive, right? That's disrupting the status quo in a way that if she does that, I'm going to be pretty supportive of it, I think, depending on how she does it. But oxes are going to get gored, right? And that's why it's hard to make change in Seattle, right? People get mad, and so we'll see. So that's, I think, a potential landmark.
People do get mad. Tiffany.
I mean, I really want to pull off of what Sandeep was talking about, just because we do have so many existential crises that the Trump regime is creating, with a continuum of care funds, with potentially getting rid of project-based vouchers, Section 8, now wanting to change public housing away from something that you can be in for a long time and only something that you can be in for 2 years. So there's not a lack of things that the new administration at the city level is going to have to, navigate. But at the local level, where I just deviate from Sandeep is that we're actually going to see from this council, who is starting to proviso funds right now in the city budget against the incoming administration. So just on the 14th, Rob Saka, Kettle, and I think it was also Rivera, but don't quote me on that last one, provisoed funds for the care team, that none of that money could be used for anything else. I think I would read between the lines to say that they think Katie is going to stop cleaning up encampments or stop getting people from being outside to being inside. And I think that will be a fight, because there is this continuum of care money that is bottoming out from the federal government. And how are we going to, with the scarce resources we have, make sure that we are housing people, that we're maintaining housing for people, and people are not entering homelessness that have been homeless, but also that we are actually providing new shelter beds for people that are currently outside, which we have not done under the Harrell administration. I think we've actually lost shelter beds in the 4 years. And he promised, remember, at the very beginning, to create 2,000 new shelter beds. But what we see from mayoral administrations since I've moved here like 11 years ago, they're always funny with the numbers. They're like, oh, we created this, but you look back and it's like, no, those were actually already in the pipeline. Those were not additive. So I think it's not actually necessarily going to come from like the left, from folks who are worried about sweeps. I think it's going to come from the council wanting to make sure that sweeps continue and are sustained in the way that they are, but not going to be willing to put up more money for the 4,000 new shelter beds that the Wilson administration has promised. I know we're going to hold her to that. Other people are, because we need people to have a place to go. But I also think that the fight is going to be with neighborhood groups who don't want tiny houses and shelters to be sited in their neighborhood. So it's going to be a land use landmine, it's going to be a funding landmine, and it's going to be about having neighborhoods who have historically, read between the lines, historically white neighborhoods not taking on their share of like shelter or transitional housing, tiny house villages. We have the space, we do have the resources, we can make this happen, but I think the fight is actually going to be with local groups. So it's going to be important for folks who want this to happen and who do want to see like unsheltered homelessness actually reduce on our streets, to get into that fight against neighborhood areas that might really weaponize the SEPA, the State Environmental Protection whatever thing. Yeah, thanks, that. As we have seen them do in the past.
One really quick point of clarification, just in support of what you were saying. Because you were saying it's funding for the CARE team, but there's the CARE department, right? But this is the $30 million going for the unified CARE. It's the encampment resolution funding, right? The unified CARE team, which is different from the CARE department, right? Yeah.
I'm just gonna say yes to everything both of them just said, and add in the landmine is the World Cup.
Yeah.
Because she's already telegraphed or signaled that she is hoping to ramp up this stuff before the World Cup. She's probably, I assume, feeling the pressure from, the president, I guess, who has talked about it or had been asked about it. And it's going to be really hard to do everything that Sandeep and Tiffani are talking about. It's going to take years. It may never even happen. Past mayors have tried. Jenny Durkin came in on a promise to build 1,000 tiny house villages in 1 year, and we know that didn't happen.
Ruth said 2,000, right?
Not tiny house villages. He said he used the ARPA money for shelter, which the ARPA money was already going to that. It's going to be really hard to do that in 6 months. The World Cup is in June. It's not that's the landmine. It's going to be really, really tough if she wants to do something before the World Cup. And I think that a lot of people will be really sensitive if it looks like she is, or her administration or the Unified Care Team or whatever is sweeping folks to get rid of, visible homelessness before the World Cup. In the 90s, when the Goodwill Games happened, like that was where a lot of like our modern, decades of homelessness activism were born out of how the city reacted to the Goodwill Games. If I can do a callback that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and Tiffani, to your point, as you were talking about, where do people go? Scott, maybe we have a new title for your next podcast, and it should be "All Politics is Siting."
That sounds so exciting. Exciting, like SITI.
Yeah, where does this stuff go?
Yeah.
Where does it go?
Yeah.
Over 70% of the people in my precinct voted for the crisis care clinic, and dozens of them showed up to say they didn't want it in their neighborhood. Yeah. Luckily, we won that, and our community has that asset, but it's just not as simple as that. Yeah. Speaking of things that are really simple, we've got a city council that is kind of in a three-way split, a three-way balance. We've got three folks kind of holding it down for the left. We've got three folks, Sandeep, you're going to hate this, who are on the right side of this, and three who are in the middle, in the center. So no easy majorities, no natural coalitions. So how does power work at city council now? And I'm going to start with you, Tiffani.
I think if adopting your buckets, that the folks on the left and those in the center that sway or feel more emboldened to sway to your left will really need to rely on the mayor's seat, but also outside interest, nonprofits, advocacy groups, campaigns, in order to push through what they want to do. If you have that public support behind you and you're not afraid to call in, and please, no, Sandeep, I'm not talking about like the red shirts or, packing City Hall and yelling people down, not that. I'm talking about getting out and talking to regular people and getting them civically engaged, educating. Like, we still need to pass our comprehensive plan update, like going out and getting regular people and having them show up, having them get civically engaged, having them show up for these priorities that the new mayoral administration have, and the three new, well, Alexis isn't new, but the two new leftist electeds come in, being able to support them. I think that's going to be really, really critical in getting people engaged using these podcasts. I don't have a podcast of my own to prioritize here or to uplift, but I think that those are going to be really important. And then I think it is just going to be a need to also introduce like a different agenda and narrative, and it'll be really interesting to see who the council president is, the shakeup with the committee structures. Does Councilmember Hollingsworth still hold on to the land use committee? We'll just have to wait and see. I know we're going to be involved in land use and the comprehensive plan to make sure that social housing can be sited all over the city, which it cannot be right now. But I think that we just need to look at that, and then adopting a narrative and pushing a narrative that isn't just about giving more power to the police to then have the police then be able to pass that power and surveillance onto the national government. So I think it depends on how much the left is mobilized and folks care and are civically engaged. Otherwise, I think it's really going to be the center that holds a lot of power, and I don't know that a whole lot will be done.
You wanna go?
I feel like I'm also like bucking the buckets. But I mean, I feel like I have issues with the buckets here, because I'm not really sure right wing to Seattle. I also just think, like, people were so shocked when Kathy Moore suggested a capital gains tax, and this is why. Sorry, Alex.
No, I'm good.
I don't know. I just don't see it. I don't know if voters see it that way, and I don't fully see it that way. But if I accept that the center would be Dan Strauss, Bob Kettle, Dan Strauss.
Oh, I did not.
Yeah, I
say
don't even.
that.
Joy Hollingsworth. What?
Joy.
So
See, I can't even.
yeah.
I don't even know who's in the buckets.
Okay, so my theory is that it's Eddie Lynn, it's
Right.
Dion Foster, and it's Alexis Mercedes Rink on the left, and you've got Joy Hollingsworth and Dan Strauss. And Deborah Juarez in the center, and Maritza Rivera and Rob Saka and Bob Kettle on the other side of the center.
If I'm accepting those
That
buckets,
feels real. That feels real.
But I don't. I just don't really. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, I think Dan Strauss and Deborah Juarez certainly, and I'm sorry, Joy Hollingsworth. So especially Dan Strauss and Deborah Juarez, they have the most experience. I assume they have the biggest, leg up, simply because they have experience along, followed closely by Alexis. So I would assume that is where the power goes. But I do think on these different issues, like, people fall in different ways. I don't know if you can. I don't even know what Dan Strauss is. He's been he voted for a defund, right? And
Yeah,
then he was like, that was a mistake. And
So, I mean, to build on what Scott was just saying, so there was this narrative that took really deep root right after the 2023 elections 2 years ago that really said, oh my God, we got a moderate mayor now, we got a moderate supermajority on the city council, and they're totally unified. They're going to drive all, the moderate train to moderate nirvana, right, or whatever was going to happen, right? Like,
Moderate Nirvana.
yeah, I'm not quite sure what that looks like. But, yeah,
That sounds lovely.
yeah. It's a sort of nice house in a bougie neighborhood that with high property value and single family, like.
Oh my God, there's a lot of kombucha on tap.
We are unpacking.
But that assumption, which I shared at the time, turned out not at all to mirror reality of what happened with this last council. I do think there was a moderate consensus or supermajority around public safety issues. And if you look at the last 2 years of this council, they passed a whole bunch of public safety legislation. But even on that front, there was a real divide between the folks on the council and the mayor's office on a lot of this stuff. And they passed a bunch of legislation that didn't really get implemented all that much, right? Because the mayor, contrary to like some of the kind of assumptions about his politics, wasn't really on board with some of that, or like had qualms about it, or like thought it was not lefty enough. Or I don't, you can talk about what his motives were on some of that stuff, but it didn't end up happening. And then outside of public safety issues, this council was all over the freaking map. Like issue by issue was like a kaleidoscope of like they would divide up in different. So I don't know that it's all that different now. With this. I mean, it's different because the power balance between your buckets is a little different. That's going to have some impacts, but like I still think issue by issue they're going to have to figure out how to count to 5, right? And that's going to vary on stuff. Like, but that's the way it was with this council on most stuff. So, anyway.
I'm gonna let it slide that it's not gonna be that it'll be the same, and I'm not gonna name any names. I'm not gonna name any names.
I forgot Deborah Juarez was back until you said it, and I was like,
Never
well,
forget Auntie DJ. She is.
You're gonna call
really.
from Deborah now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna get a call. So in Seattle, power isn't just behind the dais, and Tiffany, you already alluded to this, so I'm gonna start with you. It's in the streets, it's in your inbox, it's in rooms where people are coming up with ideas and making stuff happen. So we've got obviously electeds, we've got political players who are the insiders, we've got groups, the groups who are somewhere kind of in between the streets and the dais. And so where do you see advocacy power shifting in this new kind of political dynamic?
I'd say whereas like Mayor Harrell really depended on like his constituency that he built up during his city council time, Katie's going to need to rely on her outside constituencies in order to get a lot of her agenda over the finish line. She doesn't, unlike Harrell in the last 2 years, doesn't have I'll call it a supermajority on the council to help prop up their agenda. It is a lot more split, so I think it is just, this is going to be very much mirroring my last answer, so I'll keep it short, but it's going to be depending on those groups to do the education, to do the advocacy, to do the door knocking, to do the tabling, to talk to regular voters, to remind them that this is what was promised and this is what we're trying to fulfill and land on. And then if those things can't happen, making sure also to communicate that back to the voters. So I think it is about Transit Writers Union, How's Our Neighbors, Share the Cities, all of these other groups getting out there and supporting these changes, supporting bus lanes, supporting more housing, supporting a comprehensive plan that allows for multifamily housing to go all across our city, which it doesn't right now. It is prohibited from being so, to make sure that if we need progressive revenue to do X, Y, and Z, that we're out there supporting that. It's not just going to be able to rely on the city council and the mayor having this bond and whipping the votes that way. It is going to be dependent. And I think also it is going to be incumbent upon those groups that help get Katie into office to also hold her accountable and not to allow for the seat of power and this desire to meet in the middle, to cloud judgment or to overtake, to where actually a lot of the agenda is abandoned because there's a desire to meet in the middle. And let's just keep this a very amorphous middle. But that's the thing that's always of the concern, is when folks it's going to be the same with Mamdani and others, this desire to reach out across the aisle, to be seen as experienced, to be seen as rational and reasonable. But actually when you do that so much, you actually forget about who got you into office, what you were elected to do, and you're so focused on meeting that middle ground of stakeholders where sometimes you're not going to be able to do that, and you need to push it through with the voters that you have, and then stand it up, make sure it's successful, and then go out and parade those wins in the future. So I think there needs to be a desire to be bold, find the alliances where you can, and then using outside groups to help push that forward. And labor will play a part of that, but I think community-based organizations will play a big one in that for going forward. And that's always been the way with the council, but I think with the mayor, we have an opportunity on the left that we haven't had for so long. So it's about utilizing that and bringing voters along with you so that they stay engaged for years to come.
It's a quick, Tiffany, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It seems to me that because the left hasn't had the mayor's office in so long, there's an enormous amount of pent-up demand on the left for stuff, right? How's that going to get sorted out, right? Because you can't do everything, right? Everybody's got something they want from Katie, So do you have any thoughts? I'm just curious. I'm myself super curious about how.
Well, we have a committee No, we don't actually.
Yeah.
We have a committee, and we're gonna, find consensus where we can. I'm making fun of the left here. That's me making fun of the left. I think it is just about having that accountability, reminding, pulling in some elements of the left that think that the first thing that you do when you have a disagreement with someone who's in power is to go vocalize it in the news. Not doing that. Talking about it internally. So I don't really know. It's just I know that there are groups, folks that have agenda items. We're putting those together. We're setting up meetings with Katie. You're going to hear about the transition committee and everything going forward, but also making sure that we're pushing our stuff forward and always remembering that we have, the initiative process. We also have council members that want to push the city forward. So that's my best answer, but it is just about us staying engaged and making sure to pull back if there's too much of that waffling in the middle or, whatever other area of the city we have. Yeah.
That's what I'm kind of curious about is what does the committee of the left decide? No, but I mean, in general, in a very grassroots movement, sometimes an idea that a politician has sold out can take hold and spread quickly. And, there's this saying that I hate, but I think it can be true, is the left, eats their own. You have that, people are already talking about, with Zoran Mamdani, or locally there's Gurmai had Brad Smith standing up next to him in a photo in his transition team, right? And people are taking that. A lot of folks who do not like Microsoft and the contracts they've had in the past with Israel are taking that and running with it. I don't think it's a problem right now for Gurmai, but those kinds of things, if they spread, right, and they get big, you can have the kind of you can have the roiling kind of tide can turn over on you. And I wonder if that happens, because I do think actually Katie will be. I'm gonna just assume that she's gonna be pretty smart about how she builds coalitions and works on policy, and so it'll be interesting. And I think Gurmai as well at the county level. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens. It matters more on the Seattle level, I think, for Katie than it does on a county level or even a state level. But yeah. I'm curious about that.
It's going to be super interesting to watch this go down. So for, the old saw is that campaigns are done in poetry, but, governing is prose, right? And governing is often a series of trade-offs. It's trying to understand but it's not just the bumper sticker positive benefits, but what are the unintended consequences or downstream impacts? What are, yes, we'll get some good over here, but we're going to lose something over here. And how do you balance all that equation, right? And so that makes it that makes it hard. And the purity politics sometimes on the left, Katie may run into that. I do think that's kind of issue here. But when I think about outside advocacy here, the thing I'm most curious about is what is the business community going to do, right? How are they going to respond to a Katie Wilson administration? I was speaking on a panel like this to the Chamber of Commerce this morning, and I said to them, I kind of think if they go kind of full adversarial, with her or try to fight, obviously we're going to see progressive taxation, right? That's one of the things that Katie Wilson is known for. We're going to see that happen. What muni cap gains probably. Do we turn the dials on Jumpstart? There's any number of different progressive taxes that we can see Katie advocating. And I think where the business community has gotten most sort of crossways with the public, the progressive voter public in Seattle, is over issues of taxation and kind of their reflexive opposition to taxes. Sometimes I think that opposition might have been merited. If we're raising taxes and not doing it, not getting anything out of it. I'm not quite sure why we did this $80 million, B&O thing, because I'm not sure what we're getting out of that, or if anything, other than we're spreading some peanut butter around and but anyway, but that question is, are they going to come to the table and play ball with the new mayor and say, okay, we'll work with you on a muni cap gains tax, but here are our priorities about what we want to get funded, or are they going to go into full-scale opposition mode? is it going to be some mix of both? Is it going to start out one way, but maybe if things go too far? That relationship and dynamic is going to be fascinating to watch.
Okay, so Scott, you mentioned a roiling boil of things that are to come. So I'm going to ask you this question. It'll make sense. So Seattle, we've been talking about Seattle a lot. It's where people pay a lot of attention. But we're going to zoom out. We talked about this. Progressives held ground in Olympia, and we even picked up some city council seats in city halls. There are city halls that are not here in the city of Seattle, and they have seats in them, and those people make important decisions.
Deliverance country, right?
Scott, what do you make of how the regional politics are shifting? You've spoken to this a little bit, but what do you think this means for the midterms next year?
Yeah, I'm not saying anything that is that the New York Times is probably not already saying, but the midterms I think are definitely going to be, especially in a place as blue as this, about what's the future of the party. Is it Zoran Mamdani, or is it I don't know, Adam Smith for a local congressman, or something like, is it Abigail Spanberger, right? That'd be a better one. Or can it hold, does it have room for both? And I know that, Adam, here in Seattle is hoping to make it about like, let's not go for, Kshama Sawant is running against him. He wants to make it all about like this big sort of referendum on the problems of going too far left and veering too much to what city voters like the folks around here care about. It'll be, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that, and of course, what they're going to do in Olympia next year with probably an even bigger budget deficit than they were staring at this year. A governor who is really, really, really hard to read on taxes, and just a question of do we, try and do the thing of taxing the rich, even though the governor doesn't like that idea or hasn't said that. So, yeah, I don't know. That's probably too broad, but
Stay tuned. No, it's all good.
Yeah.
I'm going to move us into the next one, let everybody have a chance, then we'll close it out, and then we're going to turn it out to you. So this is your chance. If you want to refresh your drink, you can go up there and go get another one, start thinking about what your question is for these folks. So, and maybe you don't like the conceit of this setup for this question either, in which case...
Maybe we'll go have a drink.
And I'll just cook.
Can I just
So Seattle's politics has been kind of stuck in a cycle of sort of vibes, backlash, burnout. We can't get people, we can't get a mayor reelected. There was the whole, you heard there was a backlash election in 2023. Some progressives didn't make it through. So let's dream a little. What would it look like for Seattle politics to feel healthy again? And I will let Scott. You are lifting the mic, so you're ready to go.
It's going to be the like most surface level because I haven't. So I'd love to go first because I have not lived here. I moved here in 2017, and does anybody remember how many mayors we? I almost put up the number. Does anybody remember how many mayors we had in 2017? Bruce Harrell was one. No, we had four. Four mayors, right?
Burgess.
Because we got Durkin at the end.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yep.
I guess my thing is just a thing of like I actually do love this question. I mean you're like saying maybe you don't like the conceit of the question, but I actually do really like it.
Thank you.
So just with that said, I do think that when you look at, I mean, even New York, I mean, we all saw the stories about Eric Adams. You look at many other cities around the nation, even on the West Coast, and the politics are also very messed up. So I hope that we keep in mind that I think part of the struggle with feeling like Seattle politics are not healthy is our national politics are not healthy, but also just the fact of like, we're still really reeling and trying to deal with the fact that we are a big city and we have big city politics now. And I don't think that we ever really have like actually dealt with that. I think Seattle is still kind of in its head like half of the time like a small town or trying to regain the small town like mindset or something. And on the other hand, like, oh, we're hosting the World Cup next year. So I don't know, I don't want to be too zen about it, but I feel like sometimes it's kind of like, okay, well, remember where you sit in the context of this entire nation and moment.
So, remind me, what are we?
What would it like for Seattle politics to feel
what is
Seattle
Seattle
nice?
healthy
What
again?
does success look like, right? So I think it's two things. One, first of all, like there's I can't overestimate or is it overestimate, underestimate the importance of effective, supple, strong political leadership, right? And in making things work, right? Let me give you a tale of two cities. Chicago, a couple years ago, elected a very, very progressive mayor named Brandon Johnson, who ran on like publicly owned grocery stores. A lot of the stuff you're hearing from Katie's gesturing at, or Mamdani in New York City. He had a total progressive city council, progressive dominated city council in Chicago. Last time I checked, Brandon Johnson had a 14% approval rating. He's probably the most unpopular big city mayor in America, right? And I remember after the primary, Katie texted me about something, and we had just done an episode of my Blue City Blues podcast called "What's the Matter with Chicago," where we were talking to a very prominent Chicago person about what went wrong in Chicago. And I said that to her, and I said, boy, if you win, Katie, you don't want to end up like this, right? And she texted me right back and said, I'm going to be Michelle Wu, right? And Michelle Wu is the counterexample of a very progressive governor in the city, mayor in the city of Boston, who just got reelected basically her opponent quit the race or the primary because she killed him, right? And he's a son of the Patriots owner, and he spent all this money, and it didn't matter because she's been a very, very effective, smart politician who's been able, in part, to triangulate against her state house stuff, but in part to work her progressive groups and kind of figure that out. And just the quality of leader. She ran for re-election as a progressive with the support of the police union this year, right? So that's pretty interesting how she was able to kind of so effectively work her politics that way. So that's a huge thing that contributes to success. The other thing I will say, and I take Tiffany's point that there is this kind of weird, this total do-nothing, mushy middle where you can end up if you sort of kind of compromise too much or in the wrong stuff and nothing happens. And don't want to, obviously that's not a mark of success, but I have said this for years, this election, this mayor's race showed us not only that we're kind of, at least subjectively, deeply divided, right, between center left and left, but we're pretty evenly divided, right? This is a close frickin' race, right? And so it seems to me the only way you can make durable, big-ticket progress in the city is if you can speak across that divide and get enough buy-in for whatever agenda you're doing. This is something we used to do in the city of Seattle, even 10, 12, 15. When we did a $15 minimum wage, it wasn't Kshama Sawant jamming a $15 Now initiative. It was I recruited more than half of that $15 minimum wage task force back in 2014, and the ultimate compromise was proposed by the head of the Chamber of Commerce, right, working with UFCWs at the very progressive labor folks in the business community, got to a deal about how we're going to do a $15 minimum wage. First big city in the country to do it. It set a wave of other big cities then following in that track. And if we had just jammed 15 now, it would have been I can tell you can't not raise the minimum wage $6 an hour overnight without having a huge discrediting, kind of demand side shock that would have occurred. And so to me, it's got to be smart compromise, but there has to be ways to talk across that divide, or none of it's going to last. We will keep yo-yoing back and forth, and there'll be a kind of really kind of ugly, toxic politics that leads to division, and then people will get frustrated and they'll vote out these folks and bring in the rest of the folks. So those are the two things I would say.
I would just say that this is very idealistic, but a healthy politics would be focusing on the policy or the way to try to achieve the policy as opposed to the person, as opposed to focusing on them as an individual, their background, like getting away from that ad hominem and focusing on, I don't like this individual or I don't agree with their policies because of X, Y, and Z. I think also a way to get to a healthy politics is where we are actually making significant gain, significant changes in all of our crises that we're facing as a city. And I think over the time that I've lived here since 2013, we've just had this actual leadership vacuum for so long to where this is where ideology can come in and take over, to where on the 14th of just this month, you had actually Council President Sarah Nelson holding up a King County health bag, from what Andrea Suarez did when she was running for the State House, actually critiquing drug interdiction, harm reduction. We are creating vacuums to where the very ultra left, very ultra right can go in and then push their stuff, and then we don't even have cohesiveness. And we're seeing this across the region with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. We can't even agree on whether or not housing first is a good thing. And then you get into a cycle where if you don't have a strong base, you don't have strong support with electeds, you just have a vacuum. You can get nothing done, and then it swings back and forth, and nothing ever happens. So I would like to see the smart compromise where that is, but also not being so wedded to compromise that you aren't actually getting fulfilling anything. So that's when you go back out to the outside groups, to labor, to community organizations, or just to voting rights groups, and you get them involved, and you do it at the ballot box through a voter initiative, and you show, because there are pockets that want to put forward ideas and policies, and we saw that with the 2 initiatives I was lucky to be part of. If you put these forward to the voters, they do vote for them. So I think yes, compromise, please do bring people together, get them on board with a vision, but also recognize that we are deeply divided. We don't agree on a whole lot. And the best way to start getting agreement and buy-in is through actual concrete results that don't just last for a year or 2 years or 3 years.
Amen to that. You talked about there's great ideas out there in the community, and there's people who want things. So we're going to do a quick final question, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience questions. So let's close by lifting other people up. People in this room care a lot about the good ideas that are out there and want to be part of a Seattle that's moving forward. So there's always people out there doing the work in the shadows, organizing, building, imagining. What is a big idea or a person doing work in Seattle that more policymakers need to be paying attention to? What's the best idea, person, or group that you know of out there doing this work and who's getting it right, even if nobody's watching?
I'll go. This is my time for self-promotion.
Yeah.
Yes. She doesn't have a podcast, but she does have a nonprofit.
Well, it's not even my nonprofit, but it's
My
the
podcast
parallel.
has a nonprofit.
Yeah, there you go. I would say just because of the existential crisis that the Trump regime poses, the fact that we can't just tax things forever. Yes, I'm saying that. There is an organization that I am the board president of, and it's called Washingtonians for Public Banking. And what we are seeing because of the existential crisis with the Trump regime is we are starting to see states, we're starting to see more lawmakers here getting interested in the idea of public financing, public banking, public capitalization, to where we then are able to capitalize on our own funds, create more money through bonding or through debt to actually do public infrastructure, to do more housing, to make childcare needs, potentially student debt. I don't know who's got student debt in here. I do. I was hoping to have that erased in 2 years, but Trump is effing that all up too. So I think this idea of public banking, public financing is something also the Wilson administration has looked into, but we are having a lot more lawmakers call in. We're looking at even potentially giving the treasurer the ability to capitalize on public funds, to have more public debt, to be able to go out and have projects happen. So I would just lift that up. I think overall nationally, there is a resurgence of public sector excitement, whether that's bringing our power grids into public ownership, whether that's public banking, whether that's public housing, or whether that's just energy sectors in general moving over to public ownership. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, and I just want to uplift that work in a bit of self-promotion.
Sure. You said idea, so I'm going to jump on that. That wasn't in the original list of questions we were sent, so I was thinking about people. But I'm glad ideas are in there, because I was looking through Katie's website again, And I forgot that she had mentioned that she wants to explore a regional housing bond. That has been on the table as a potential fix for our housing, problem for years. I remember in 2021, that was something that Casey Six Killer was talking about in his run for
campaign.
mayor, and he was like the only person talking about it. And I was like, this is not going to get anywhere, but it seems like the only thing that can do, and it's not a quick fix, but it does seem like one of the only real things that can make a difference. And so I hope that gets more discussion, I guess I should say, as a reporter who can't put my, can't say I endorse it, but I hope it gets more discussion.
There are some ideas percolating out there around housing finance that could be kind of creative and interesting, and so, but for me, I think everybody cast their minds back to the beginning of this year, right? There was Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson wrote a book, Abundance, that is a huge bestseller, and certainly for a lot of left of center folks that are interested in policy and good governance and the functionality of government. Like, that book created quite a stir. And sort of downstream from that, there have been in a number of different blue cities sort of abundance-focused organizations kind of coming together to do work about how can we do better on building more housing. I was just having a meeting. So there's, including in Seattle, there's a small group of people that have started to come together. Ben in the audience here and I have been talking with some of those folks, maybe some of the other folks that are part of that conversation. We'll see where that all goes, but I think that has a lot of potential opportunity to really fix some of the things that have the bottlenecks that we've sort of created with the best of intentions in governance. We can blow some of that stuff up. We might be able to start delivering more, whether it's on housing or transit or transportation or stuff like that. I'd love to see that go into turn into something bigger and more productive, and I think that potential is there.
I just want to say I was on the train a couple months ago, and I heard two very young, like college-age guys talking about abundance, and I was like, this is either the most Seattle moment in my life, or maybe I'm on the train to moderate Nirvana.
Yeah, moderate Nirvana. Right. We'll put you in a single-family home,
Goodness gracious. What questions are out there in the room? Right here.
So I'm curious about what Katie's going to do about the bureaucratic fiefdoms in the city of Seattle.
The question is, what is Katie Wilson and the Wilson administration going to do about the bureaucratic fiefdoms that exist in the city of Seattle?
And Fred, can you elaborate a little bit? What do you mean by fiefdoms exactly? Like,
Everything's in a silo in the city.
Yeah.
They don't work across the silos. They don't realize that results-based processes require collaboration across organizational boundaries. They're very functionally oriented, not product-oriented. It was a really great thing when I was at King County because we could point to them as an example of how not to do it. Repeat.
The indomitable
you're not
Fred
you're not talking about
Fred
Fred Jarrett, former deputy
amazing,
county executive.
good governance champion. Everything in Seattle's in silos, and folks are not able to produce results because they're not collaborating across to outcomes as opposed to downwards into scope.
And I think you're talking not just about the city departments, but also the nonprofit and community-based organizations as well. It sounds like, yeah.
Well, just really, I mean, this is where leadership matters, right? About, if you want to create a culture of collaboration across departments, right, across the complexities of Seattle municipal government, it's possible. It's not easy, but it's possible to do. Fred, I know you guys at the county, when you were there, really put an emphasis on trying to do that. And this is where personnel is policy in some ways, right? It's going to really matter. I know people like me are going to be really looking at who Katie brings in with her into the mayor's office and into the department to run the departments. And then, there's a cabinet, right, of all the department heads who come together. And if you work that right, you can figure out how do you get the departments to kind of work together across.
That's not all true.
Okay, why
All
not?
about what you measure. If you measure results, if you measure output, you get people working together.
Yeah.
If you bring together functional managers, you get functional managers.
Yeah.
I think that at the city, what I've seen is, there's a real fear of creating a negative headline, especially around. I mean, I used to cover homelessness, so obviously that's jumping into my head. I remember it when Catherine Lester was running the Human Services Department at the City of Seattle and trying to do a big overhaul to streamline. And I'm sure people have opinions about what she was trying to do and how successful she was at it. But one of the things they were trying to do is take money from like urban rest stops at Lehigh that Lehigh was running and put them into 24/7 hygiene centers. So essentially you could stay at a shelter, get up in the morning and take a shower at that shelter. The problem was that the money was sitting across town in Lehigh's urban rest stops. And when they tried to take that and defund the urban rest stops and put them in Compass housing and things like that, Lehigh, and to be honest, Sharon Lee, who's the first person I think of when you talk about fiefdoms, sorry, she went to the media and it was a whole big thing, and she went to Sawant, and it was a whole big thing. And you probably have more insight into all that than I do, but you're going to have to be willing to, one, take a couple of bad headlines, and two, go and explain that, because the problem was it took reporters all day to figure out what was even happening. And it wasn't that Lehigh was getting its urban rest stops defunded, or at least that wasn't the entire story. There was a bigger story that the city and Catherine Lester, to be honest, couldn't tell. Didn't do a good job, from my remembrance of telling. Of course, this was 2018, so I don't know. I could remember it totally wrong, but yeah.
I don't disagree, Fred, about performance measurement or anything. I do think we were doing more of that at one point and have gotten away from it, both at the city and the county. I remember, what was it called, like Kingstat back in the in my county. And look, I'm gonna get into a touchy area here, but like I think whatever you want to call that period, but the sort of peak woke period, we decided that actually measuring outcomes and stuff like that was, I don't know, racist somehow, and we weren't going to do that anymore, and therefore, we were just going to hand out, So there, a lot of that shit, I think, did get kind of dug into, sort of the bureaucratic sinews of local government, and I think we're kind of unwinding some of that stuff now and saying, well, if we actually want results, we kind of do have to do more stuff like measure performance and stuff like that. So I don't disagree.
Stephen.
I'm curious what you guys think about. I feel like we haven't sat with the fact that Dion Foster and Eddie Lynn and Alexis Mercedes-Ring have won with almost 70% of the vote. What do you guys think they are getting right?
Yeah.
Setting aside the mayor's race for a second, which was more contentious.
Yeah.
But I can't remember. I've lived here for 10 years. I can't remember a time that both open seat and incumbent and challengers to incumbents are winning with, more than 2/3 of the vote. What are they getting right that says about what Seattle wants? And I almost wanted this diagonal lane that it's like the holy grail as a political consultant. I'm always seeking that diagonal lane that's not left or right, but it's across both. What are they getting right that almost 2/3 of voters are saying, I want that person, whether it's an incumbent or an open seat or whatever.
Yeah, the question is, congratulations, a recently elected person in our audience, re-elected. The question is, the 3 city council races that were up this year, those people won by landslides,
Challengers
right?
won.
Challengers, incumbents, new folks. And I think I read that Alexis's was one of the top margins ever in the history of the city of Seattle, and our mayor's race was one of the tightest margins in the history of the city of Seattle. So, what are these city council candidates or campaigns doing so amazingly well? Tiffany, you want to start?
I'm gonna just put Alexis over here because she was also running against insert. I'm gonna let's just put that over. Let's just put that over there, like running against like an outward Trump Republican. Like good on Rachel Savage for flying her flag. But let's just put Alexis over there. Alexis is also, I think, really great. Has gotten a lot done as being the outsider, like the most left on the council in a not left council, and like was responsible for the Shield initiative with the mayor. So Alexis is out here. So what for the others, I would say, just like Council President Sarah Nelson has just not gotten a lot done, and she's actually made a lot more headlines and had people do her dirty work. And I think that she's just so vehemently unpopular and has not just concretely done a lot. She wanted to pull back a lot of things, and I'm not trying to like ruffle feathers, but I just think like overall she went in there just to like give more money to the police, to criminalize poverty, to criminalize folks who have addictions, and like that was her thing, and that worked for a little while. But then all of these crises are continuing to bubble up, and there wasn't any attention on childcare. There wasn't any attention on housing affordability. She rushed through this Soto Stadium district, and regardless of what you think about that, I think we need more housing. The way that it was done was just so opportunistic and so fumbly, and now it was completely overruled, and that like burnt a lot of bridges. That burnt a lot of bridges between the city and the Port of Seattle. So I think she alone was just like quite unpopular, and Dion came in with a lot of progressive cred, a lot of support right out the gate from Democratic establishment, from progressives. She was part of the Progress Alliance. She also came in running strongly on progressive revenue and more housing. I mean, she helped lead up the capital gains tax at the state level. And then I think just like at the end of the day in District 2, Adonis Ducksworth didn't really put forward a whole lot. It was vibey. It was like a really cool guy you want to go like skateboard with. I can't skateboard, but I would want to skateboard with him. But other than that, I didn't know concretely what they were going to bring in, where Eddie Lynn, very, I'll say, pivoted for social housing. He saw how overwhelmingly popular it was in his district, but he's also going in there wanting to change that bottleneck that Sandeep talked earlier. Like he came in with concrete policies. He's worked in the Office of Housing. He's worked in the attorney's office. He comes in with all of that, and he was actually running on something as opposed to just running as a person. So I'm sorry, Stephen, it's not like here's the sweeping generalizations. I think it's just looking at those race by race. But I think that it was just such an unpopular elements of the council that weren't making deep change in all of the like fundamental issues that folks are feeling. I mean, yes, police hiring has increased. There's been a lot of movement on there. But we're also like obfuscating a lot of our responsibility and surveillance to the federal government in a time when we know that the Trump administration is using like cameras, surveillance, to seek out folks that they think shouldn't be in this country. So I think when you tie yourself to that, it's going to be a losing message and strategy during this time.
It's a good question, right, of what happened there. I think fundamentally the biggest driver of the success of the council progressive candidates, obviously running against Republicans is, it's part of the, it's part of the factor here. But the left really changed its message, man, from 4 years ago. It's very, very different. Like you compare whether it was even Katie's campaign, but the council, Erica Evans compared to Nicole Thomas Kennedy, who was running for city attorney 4 years ago, or whether it's Dion Foster, compared to Nikita Oliver running 4 years ago, right? So this is a progressive city. But it's also, it's a very educated, affluent, economic, we are a capitalist success story, right? And we have all the problems that come with this kind of success, right? To borrow a phrase from Danny Westney, we had a prosperity bomb dropped on us, and it's created all this inequality and all these other kinds of issues that are coming back to kind of drive the kind of reservoir of unhappiness that we were talking about earlier. But so these are voters that are looking for, they want progressive, active governance. You know what they don't want is the radical raising of core municipal institutions. They don't want radical chic, performative BS, which is, I think, what we got from the left for a long time here. And so I credit to Dion and to Katie and to Erica, like they kind of figured out. Katie wrote that she won't call it a mea culpa piece. I asked her about this on Seattle Nights at one point, and she won't accept that phrase. But she wrote a very interesting, thoughtful piece back in January in The Stranger before she ran, saying, "Hey, the left got some things wrong about homelessness. We need to rethink, and about public safety, and we need to rethink about how not just how we talk, but hopefully kind of how we address some of those issues." And I think she took that to heart. So did the other candidates, and it played huge benefits for them in this race.
Can I say, sorry, Scott, just one other thing, and I kind of hope we do this more. And Sandeep, I'd like to hear if you disagree now or later. Groups that cared about this election and were like door knocking and whatnot ran these candidates also as a slate. These candidates didn't all themselves run as a slate, but when you looked at videos of door knocking, they were all 5 together. So they were like these outside organizations like Tech for Housing and others that were doing a lot of door knocking. We're running them as a slate and turning out their people. The LDs were turning out them as a slate. So even though they didn't, minus like the cool kids vibe of like Dion and Alexis and Erica Evans, they ran as kind of a slate at the end. But I think that if we start doing that a lot more and we have everyone turning out for a slate of candidates that are kind of united behind the same vision, we're going to start seeing a lot more wins in the way that we want to see, as long as they also deliver at the end of the day.
One small area, there was real ticket splitting in this race, right? There were a bunch of candidates that voted for Dion and Erica and Bruce, right? So there was, that said, I think Tiffany's putting her finger on something that's pretty significant, and also is another answer to this question, which is that those candidates were really effective at using tools like social media, some of the slate stuff, some of the video stuff that they did. Katie's campaign's video game is like, A+, right? The thing she did today, even about she started trolling that stuff about her getting money from her parents, and now I have a job, and I don't need any more money from my parents, and it's funny, right? And good, and that really. They effectively really mobilized a constituency of younger renter kind of voters and got them to turn out in an odd year election, right? Which doesn't always happen, and that really drove their margins, right? I said this. I did an interview with Governing Magazine a week ago or whenever it was, and I said they were asking what happened in this race, and I was like, it's not really like the rebellion or the revolution of the proletariat here, right? The underclass in America in Seattle has already mostly moved out of the city because it's too expensive to live there, right? But it was like the kind of, educated but underemployed, like this is like the baristas and the bike messengers at the barricades, right? It was a conflict of the haves versus the have-lesses, right? And in a city that has so much wealth and had this prosperity bomb, if you're young and educated and have these sort of life prospects but are feeling like you're not sharing in the prosperity that others are enjoying, and it's the precariat is, I think, the Megan Burbank is a term that there was an article in the Nation we were talking about earlier. I think that also played into it, right? But it was this kind of getting these younger kind of voters that are feeling kind of left out to turn out. That really did play into the scale and the size of these wins, and into Katie's victory outright, right?
Yeah, I think Katie was the only council candidate or anyone in city government to endorse Katie, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, was it Alexis?
Yeah.
Just Eddie.
Oh, Eddie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll have time for one more question, and but I'll just say to your point, Sandeep, like millennials are the first generation to be doing worse than their parents, and so like it is actually.
I would push back a little. I would push back, if you dig farther in the data on this stuff, I got to stand up for Gen X here, so I got to.
Always.
Yeah. So
always.
You push
Marsha.
harder than data. Overall, that's true, but college-educated millennials are actually doing better than college-educated Gen X people were. Right? It's because of income inequality. Like non-college-educated millennials are doing way worse than their counterparts were 25 years ago, but college-educated folks are continuing to kind of climb the ladder, right? So there's a nuance to that.
Gen X crowd is pleased.
Yeah, Gen X,
All right, last question. Dr.
We
Page.
had it hard, let me tell you.
Oh, there it is.
I'm Steve Page from the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington, and a proud member of the Block Table Executive Committee. This has been great. Thank you all. I want you to, if the panel would be so gracious as to crystallize what they think the sort of workable theory of politics is that was embedded in kind of the last go-round before we broke for the Q&A. What I mean by that is we heard sort of two theories of politics across the course of the discussion. First, we had Harold the Great Conciliator, right, from Sandeep. And then we had Katie, the mobilizer in chief, from Tiffani, right? When you were talking about sort of Katie's got these different constituencies that have really backed her and are big fans of her policy ideas. And, you know, sort of in some sense, I was thinking of that as kind of like, okay, you do politics so you get policy, and then the Katie theory was you have these policy ideas so you can get politics out of it. And then all of a sudden we had this discussion about the $15 minimum wage, and all of a sudden there was this interesting kind of meeting of the minds between the McCoy theory and the Kaushik theory of politics. Well, actually maybe there's like we get a bunch of smart people in a room representing different interests, and we kind of hash something out, and then there's some political leadership that happens somewhere. Anyway, so that sounds a little bit like conciliation to me, maybe. But it's not. So I want you to draw out what is this thing that happened for the $15 minimum wage and that we hope might happen if we are to heal the body politic here.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. I'll just quickly, my 2 cents on this. Like, the kind of transactional politics of appeasing interest groups is sort of I think the kind of standard default politics in Seattle right now. That's very different from saying, let's set a big progressive goal. Like I 2 years ago was trying to get people to get together and like, let's actually do a ballot measure, raise a bunch of money to fund an effort to address what was then turning into the kind of disaster of fentanyl in terms of the kinds of massive increase in overdose deaths we were seeing on the streets this year, which goes on. It's a little bit less, but it's still like at a terrible, terrible toll. And so that's really different. That's getting people who disagree with each other in a room around a common goal and kind of figuring out how do we make that work and how do we fund it, and what is the give and take behind a kind of strong policy, progressive policy result. That's sort of the opposite of like going around and saying, no, politics is about just throwing a bone to you and you and you on your thing. I'm going to give you like some money for your whatever labor thing, and I'm going to give you some, this or that. It's kind of, that's the small ball politics of like transaction as opposed to a kind of bigger politics of progressive change, right? I don't know. So that's my take.
Stephen, will you I think I've got you, but can you just sum up your question overall? It's like, what is our theory of change going into this next?
What is if Alex's last question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to articulate the grand unified theory of the entire panel tonight. What is your Alex's last
You want to take your class.
Alex's last question to you all before she unleashed the lions on the panel was. What will it look like if we can have a healthier politics in Seattle? And so my question to you all is, what does that look like? Does it look like this conciliation, or does it look like mobilizing your constituents who have backed you toward a broad vision? And so, or is it something a little in between, which Sandeep just articulated, which is inviting both your constituents and others into a room to sort out how do we achieve a big, hairy, ambitious goal or three?
I'll just say for me, at the end of the day, I want government to work. I believe that government can do a lot better than it is now. I want government to stop casting off its responsibilities and duties just simply to the private sector or to the public-private sector. And I believe that we can get back to a government that works for everyone and provides folks the things that they need. Not everything, it's not a utopia. I'm not a utopian. But that's my like grounding principle. So if there's a way to get into a room and then come up with this grand unified theory, therefore, and you can go forward and push it. But I also know that if we had done that for social housing, we would have a shell of what it is, and we would probably get $5 million, and nothing would happen. Nothing would change. We do this in Seattle. We make pilots. We pilot RV safe lots. And we're like, here's for 12 spots. We have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people that are living in their vehicle. And then we're like, oh, but it doesn't work. And it's like, you mean the 10 vehicles that were able to have a safe lot is now saying all of these people can't get in and get a safe lot? No, we set ourselves up for failure. So if Katie can do that, if this new administration can do that, get people in a room. But I also think at the end of the day, we don't always have the same interests, and we shouldn't be afraid to say that we don't have the same interests. And we'll go out and do those and push those forward, because that is what I campaigned on. I want elected officials to not give up all of their campaign promises once they get into office, once they get cozier to power, once they get cozier to money. And that's where I think it's incumbent on, regardless of your political leanings, if you get someone into office that you believe in, you have to hold them accountable in whatever ways that you can. And if you can't get things done behind closed doors, you bring it out into the public arena and do that. So not a concise answer, but I think that at the end of the day, it is really incumbent, especially on the left, especially when so much is stacked up against them, when you have police unions putting out press releases against who's going to be taking over the executive. You have to know where power is, and you can't have this like shadow come over you, or like blinders go on once you get into office and get into the halls of power. So I think it's both, and it's just wherever you can. But at the end of the day, you need to be delivering for your constituents. Otherwise, you really need to get the hell out of there.
All right. We have to close it because after this is a band. You can stay here and listen to the band. You can drink more drinks at the Rabbit Box. You can mark your calendars for the next block table, where we're finalizing it right now. But maybe some of the people you've heard be discussed right up here on the stage might be on this stage. Keenan. But thank you for coming. Congratulate yourselves. Congratulate this panel. You care about Seattle, and the future is ours.
Great panel.